So what did I do when I got there was, you know, I volunteered and had good ideas, right? So they didn't really have a specific role, but the few things they asked me to do, which I think edit some video content, help with different things, put input into, you know, the website and the app that they were trying to develop at the, a little bit later. And I was just very involved and had good ideas, and it was good to work with, and showed up and was reliable. And through that, I was on that committee for something like 6-8 years. They eventually, gave me a full position. And the lesson there we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's just, just find something you're interested in, you can contribute and get involved and be reliable and have good ideas and be fun to work with, and you get far. So that's kind of, the simple answer about how to get involved in organized neurosurgery. So after I got involved there, then I wanted to see about, how more I could get involved. And the natural thing is the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. So there's not too many entry points for young people into organized neurosurgery, but this was a prominent one. This was actually started by Dr. Hiros. There's like a paper that our committee wrote at the 30-year anniversary of the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. If anybody's interested in the JNS, you can look it up, about the history of the Young Neurosurgeons Committee and how that started. It was back in the early 90s. So he helped essentially from the senior level get some people to get started in the Young Neurosurgeons Committee, and it's grown since then. So as of now, it's the group where young neurosurgeons, and actually there's several resident medical student positions as well, can get together, integrate into the organization. It has a lot of roles now in the young neurosurgeons, but integrate in the organization, get onto committees with the senior people. Also, we have our own projects we do that help medical students and help other residents. And then the one secondary thing that we do is by integrating in this way, we actually are mentored by other people that we interact with that are more senior. And so through our own committee and through these interactions, we develop the future leaders of neurosurgery. We also provide this channel for young neurosurgeons to, get the ear of the more senior group and impact the direction of the specialty. So I wanted to be involved in this for historical reasons, and because I thought it was a great way to integrate into organized neurosurgery. So I ultimately, the way the process works is you have to be nominated and send in a letter. And many other people do this as well. And then there's a national vote, and then certain people are elected to the committee. So I was elected in 2012. And then after that, you are assigned one or two groups to go to. And of course, I volunteered to be on the IT committee since I had an interest in that. So I was liaison to the IT committee. It wasn't a super popular one. So, unlike being the spine section liaison or something like that, it was easy to integrate. So I continued that work on the IT committee as being the official liaison from the young neurosurgeons after that. One of their big emphases at the time, the few things that they ran at the national meeting was Top Gun, which was like a competition amongst all the residents who could do kind of like essentially virtual reality surgeries the best, and it was scored and there was a winner. So that had kind of been like becoming less and less popular over time, so they wanted to revamp it. So I volunteered to help with that, and the contribution was that added a competition component between programs. So for a while there was like a national winner of the the program that had the best score, et cetera. So that seemed to garner a lot of interest. We put a lot of this onto what ended up being my role in the committee that I came up with, which was to have a social media and IT presence. So we put a lot of this, competition stuff on social media, so it became better known, right? I volunteered to revamp the Young Neurosurgeons web pages. I wanted to have a Young Neurosurgeons social media account, but at the time, there's a lot of resistance about that from the senior AANS board of directors perspective because of like some early experience with like the Uncle Harvey forums. I think there's a little bit of hesitance that they didn't really fully understand if this could devolve into kind of like mudslinging a little bit. But eventually convinced them, wrote a series of rules, was very prepared, had a plan. And Stacy actually, before she finished her time as chief or as the chair, here she is getting her like little award for being the chair. And this is Crystal Tomei, who was the Young Neurosurgeons chair to follow. I was able to get it passed through the board that we could have social media presence. So we started YNC Twitter in like 2013, 14, something like that, maybe 2014. And had revamped the website. And then I ran the Twitter account for many years. And it was successful. It was like an outward facing, way to get what the Young Neurosurgeons community was doing out there, interact with other people, with the idea being maybe not everybody checks their email, but they may interact with you on social media. And so through all that service, in kind of opening a new avenue for the committee, that was kind of in a meritocracy way, which is the way we like to do on the committee, rewarded with more and more kind of like senior and higher level positions. And the one that I was kind of asked to be involved with was the CSNS, which we kind of glossed over earlier, was where all the state societies come together and pass resolutions. So I was liaison. It was a new position at the time, and I was a liaison to that group for several years, and it was great. But that's kind of how I think you need to think about involvement, which is just like get plugged in, show up, be energetic, take on projects, do them well, and you'll advance. So I don't think there's like a really particularly complex formula. That's pretty much it. So other things that I did when I was there, eventually I was elected internally within the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. I ran for the secretary, which naturally transitioned to chair. So it's 2 years as secretary, 2 years as chair. So I was elected to that position based on my work. And it is a meritocracy thing. You can't just show up out of the blue and run, expect to win. You have to have done a lot of work and have a resume. They make you put your resume, what you've done on the committee when you go through the election process. So I don't remember exactly in the timeline, but I was also helping develop neurosurgerymatch.org, which some of you guys may have heard of at the time. But those is, in addition, I was the standard, ran the newsletter as secretary, which is a big job. Continues the IT lead. And then, we have all these executive committee, which is like the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary, and a few other people that kind of talk about the direction of all the projects. And so I would contribute as a member of the executive committee, is what we call it. So then in 2018 through 2020, I became the chair after that secretary experience. So as that experience, you get to go and actually be a part of the board of directors meetings, which is amazing. So you meet all the highest level people in the YNC in a lot of the sections, and you feel very much a part of the direction of organized neurosurgery. And as the chair, you're representing the Young Neurosurgeons Committee and the group of all the young neurosurgeons below that. There was a really amazing opportunity to become that Dr. Rutka gave the Young Neurosurgeons group, which is to elect in a meritocracy way, a meritocratic way, reviewers for the JNS. So you kind of become an ad hoc part of their editorial board. Through that process, I was actually elected to that position as well, and I became a JNS reviewer. So these are like amazing, opportunities that only happen because I worked hard at volunteering for this and that, right? And then I was the YNC chair during the pandemic, which is interesting because I only had one in-person meeting, I think, during my 2-year time there as chair. But viewed this as an opportunity to think about other ways that the Young Neurosurgeons Committee could contribute to young neurosurgeons in the absence of actually in-person meetings, which is the majority of what our role was at the time. So one thing we came up with was the Young Neurosurgeons in NREF webinar, which we had 16 episodes in that one year during the pandemic. And I don't know exactly how many it is now, but it's over 15,000 views of those webinars on YouTube, not including the in-person ones. In combination with the MSNTC, we started a podcast really focused on issues related to medical students. And I don't know the numbers, I have to ask Michael, but I know it's over 8,000 downloads. It's probably much more than that by now. And then, our social media presence, we expanded during the pandemic. So the Twitter account became really popular during the pandemic and for many reasons, but one of them was probably the webinar and the different, it's kind of like a touch point for medical student information also. For example, the Senior Society used us in our social media, and we organized serendipitously an email listserv to all of our medical student chapters, the YNS medical student chapters. So all the pivots in the interview process during the pandemic going to virtual, many announcements were made through our social media and listserv we had just randomly developed for the pandemic. And so that was a really good point we were like the point group for a lot of these changes that were happening in neurosurgery, particularly as it related to the interview trail. And then the student chapters and the different medical schools continues to grow, the YNS student chapters, the reviewer spots, due to the good job that all of our committee members did on those positions, grew and increased in size and was kind of renewed for another 2-year term. And then even beyond that, we kind of continue to grow the roles of the committee and maximize the position of leadership that we had to serve our members. So one of the things that we did is we started focusing on how can this group of people that are kind of perched in this national leadership position write and influence the field as far as like how the pathway is for young neurosurgeons. So we did a few different things. Like for instance, here's one which is like the history of the Young Neurosurgery Committee that was published in the JNS. This is a recent senior society and combined young neurosurgeons survey of the experience of that group of people who are interviewing for neurosurgery that went through everything virtual, and to see what we want to keep, what we want to change in the future, what people, even all the way down to what people are looking for in programs, and amazing information. So this is just recently published in JNS. So this is just a few examples. So that's different ways that we tried to improve things. Then we started a fund for one of the people who was a NS employee who was tasked with kind of being the liaison to our committee. She mentored a lot of us and was amazing. So we actually started this, she retired, and so we started this fund with this complex how INREF funds work a little bit, but to get donations to ultimately like sponsor mentorship and education and research for medical students, particularly ones that have trouble getting plugged into national neurosurgery, maybe some sort of not the top 10 NIH funded locations or something like that. So anyway, we're in the midst of accepting donations. We have to hit a certain bench threshold, and then we can start using the money for medical student endeavors. But this is something else that we established during that time. So that's kind of an overview of how I went through things and how I thought about it, and some of the kind of the wins that we had, and how we kind of adapted to the adversity of the pandemic. I want to just impart like what I've found to be true through this process. And so I just was going to give a few slides on that. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to stop me. So, what I say is like how to get integrated into neurosurgery. I mean, there's a lot of people that want to be involved, and it's actually hard to get people involved, like in my time in the Young Neurosurgery Committee, because there's only a few very heavily sought after positions on the committee for medical students, and they're elected. So a lot of people want to volunteer, and it's just hard to really integrate them, completely. So we try, but one of the big things is showing up and showing interest. So if you see someone one time, you kind of forget about them, but if you see them many, many times, then it helps, you to like, oh, that moment where you have something, they come to mind, right? So, number 2 is show up and show interest. And then of course, number 3 is also show up and show interest, right? Volunteer. So a lot of people, again, ask to volunteer, and on your mind, you don't have like a perfect thing for them, but if you see them and hear them enough, and see them, they've asked many people in your, Young Neurosurgery Committee, for example, and they've gotten something and they've done well with it, then the next time something comes up, you think of them as well, So, volunteer, and this goes not only for medical students, but also this goes for people like on the Young Neurosurgery Committee or similar committees or in the MSNTC. So you can't volunteer so much that you don't do quality work, but you should volunteer, and once you get a good project you think you're suited to do, do it. So even better than just volunteering is volunteer with a good idea. Now, the people I saw really take off, including myself, didn't just show up to the leadership and say, I want to volunteer. They actually said, hey, like I've identified a project that you guys, or something you guys are missing, and I want to lead fixing that, right? So like the Twitter thing was a good idea, like, a good example. So like, this group would really be really well served with a Twitter account. I would like to lead that. You don't have to worry about it. I'll do it. I'll write all the rules. I'll write everything. You can take it to the board. I'll manage it. You don't have to sweat it, but it'll make you look good as the leader of the organization, right? So that kind of thing, will send you to the stars in a way in organized neurosurgery. Another good example is actually the webinars. So the webinars, I had seen other people do webinars, but I hadn't really thought too carefully about it for the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. And there was a very enterprising medical student. He sent a beautiful presentation about a webinar that she actually wanted young neurosurgeons to collaborate with, that she was doing at her medical school. And I told her, well, I'll help your medical school one, but what you've written here is spectacular, and I'm very impressed. And we should try and start a young neurosurgeons one, and you can be involved in that one as well. And then just because of the way that the resources ended up working out, and there was no in-person, resident education camps because of COVID. The INREF and us collaborated, and she was kind of the medical student who helped us behind the scenes, and made that happen. And so a medical student from Mexico was an integral part of the Young Nurses INREF webinars, right? Because she volunteered, but not only volunteered, but volunteered with a good idea and with a lot of work and unique skill that she could bring on the back end of it. So just another example of how not only volunteering, but volunteering with actually a good idea and a willingness to see it through can propel you. And I can tell a bunch of stories like that. But that's just some one of my keys. Anytime you're given a task, even if it's not like your number one task you ever want to do, you got to do it. You have to do it really well and ideally quickly, a quick turnaround. This goes for everything. This goes if you're given a research project by a mentor. It's just really good rules in general, but it works for organized neurosurgery as well. And then finally, you just want to be really good to work with, affable and a team player, and enjoy your time on the committee. Like I said before, this is all volunteerism, and it's all for the greater cause. Yes, there are within academic neurosurgery, you do need to develop a national reputation if you want to get promoted, and all those diffuse positives of being involved, right? That is incentivized for academic neurosurgeons, for example. But in reality, it's a grind. It's a lot of stuff that you probably won't get credit for, other than like to cobble a million of them together to be in a position. But really enjoy it and enjoy the process with your colleagues and be a team player. And you just do that and you just repeat. That's pretty much it from my perspective. I'm sure I've missed some good points, but those are the ones I could think of.
Hey everyone, Ryan Rad here from neurosurgerytraining.org. If you like that video, subscribe and donate to keep our content available for medical students across the world.